be better, given what they all are talking about. Because what I want to get out to you is about the importance of science communication and science outreach. So, Bad Presentation Bingo, I know it's a very cutesy title. Where the idea came from to do a bingo game based on presentation habits was from my experience of attending talks on subjects that I was really, really interested in, but the presenters were so awful, I got absolutely nothing out of it, and I learned nothing. So that's how it happened. I think you all should have gotten copies of it, and we'll get to the real game in a minute, but I did just want to kind of talk to you. My purpose here is to convince you of the ultra huge importance of doing this outreach, and I think Don and Mike pretty much did it too. My focus is more on kind of that lay general public, the not scientifically educated public. And there are many, many aspects of science communication, but this morning I'm really just going to do kind of a who, what, when, where, why, nuts and bolts sort of thing, because I'm hoping that these are all just really reminders to all of you, and you're already great communicators and already really engaged in science outreach. So where I come from at this is I have a passion for science communication, but I do not have a background. I am not a scientist. I actually have a law degree and a master's degree in public policy. Those are two fields that really do care a lot about science communication, or about communication in general. But for me, my avocation is science. I am a huge consumer of science for the lay public. So that's where I come at it. And I have, not exaggerating, I have attended hundreds and hundreds of programs over time. But what I discovered several years ago in that Chicago, huge, awesome city, you should all visit, they have an extraordinary number, literally thousands of organizations and institutions that do public outreach in art, music, theater, dance, literature, you name it. They've got it for the adult audience. But when it comes to science and technology, there was virtually nothing. And so I broadened my research and spent a lot of time, and I looked at all the other major U.S. cities and realized that was true across the entire country. Now, yes, there are science museums and science centers, and they do a fantastic job, but their target market is kids. It's 8 to 13-year-olds is that prime audience, that prime age range when it's about keeping kids interested in science. But once you're over 18, there was nothing. And I was like, well, what? We just watch Nova documentaries, and that's what we do. So that's why I decided to create the Illinois Science Council. So this is a nonprofit organization. It's to serve as the science and tech complement to all the arts and culture outreach that goes on, and also as the adult counterpart to all the kids and student outreach that goes on. And so what happens at ISC is we create programs that we think we can sell science to the public on and make it appealing, make it engaging, and also to highlight the scientists and the research, because Chicago has this extraordinary concentration of science research that goes on in that city. And so so the idea is for the whole mission of this is getting more science out to the lay public that I'm so passionate about. So I went from being kind of a consumer to a producer, but the most important thing is I read all of the evaluations for every single program we do, and some of which have hundreds of people. So I hear and see what people like and what they don't like in the science communication to the lay public. So the question then becomes, why should you do science outreach? As he says, why not you? Why not now? Why not you? And so we have our little like angel halo and the devil on there. And that is to say, you might be a very benevolent, generous person caring about your community, and that's why you should do science outreach, or you are totally self-serving and care only about your own career and your own thing. You know what? Either way, science outreach is really important. And you know what? I don't really care why you do it. I just want to make sure that you actually do it. Total sidebar here, just because Don was talking about the, if you care, maybe you care about Congress, right? And you care about science's representation in Congress. Do you realize that in this election, we can double the number of physicists in this Congress? Double? This is an important election. The bad news is it means going from 1 to 2. There's one physicist in Congress now, but if my guy Bill Foster wins in Illinois, upsets an incumbent, a long-term incumbent, we will have 2 physicists in Congress. So that's good. It's a start. Anyway, so let's talk about, so let's say you're a good, generous person. You understand that science is about understanding how the world works. It makes us better critical thinkers. It makes us better consumers. It makes us better voters, and on and on and on. So maybe it's that you care about the low sort of science literacy rates in our country. So if you're a good person, you want the world to have less suffering, confusion, disease, and death. And that's why you should do science outreach. The other notion is maybe you see this sort of stuff out there in our community. And you realize this unnecessarily costs people, a lot of people, not just their time, but their money, and sometimes actually even their lives. So now, I would never claim that this exists because scientists won't do public outreach. No, 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 that's a causative argument that I can't claim. But you know what? If guilt motivates you to do public outreach, I'll take it. So let's say you're not so benevolent. Maybe you're just like, hey, my time is precious to me. I'm not altruistic. All I care about is, you know, my career, my advancement, that sort of thing. But I'm here to tell you that if you spend even a fraction of the time on developing your skills as in doing outreach, as you spend on your science, it is going to pay off for you in spades. It really, really is going to help you. If you do this sort of thing, it's going to make you a better writer. It really is. Doing speaking is going to make you a better writer, actually, and a better communicator, which means you write better grant proposals. What happens when you write better grant proposals? You're more likely to get funding. So that's straight to your pocketbook, as it were. It makes you a better instructor. I mean, especially if you're not going to make you a better instructor, it makes you a better mentor. So that's going to give you better, better evaluations, that sort of thing. So it really is about sort of helping you professionally. It makes for you to have better relationships within your institutions. That means the higher-ups recognize you as valuable. They want to present you, have you interact with the donors and the funders, and also with the media. Now, I know there's reluctance to talk to the media sometimes, but if you do that sort of thing, you, again, increase your visibility to those ever-important funders for such things. Also, now, what is ever so critical is the interdisciplinary research that is in every field of science. So you're going to be collaborating with people who are not in your area of expertise. So if you do more of this kind of stuff, speaking with people outside your very, very narrow field, you're going to be better off in doing that. And here's one that I just got literally last week, meeting with a guy at University of Chicago, and he was talking about, he got this insane amount of media attention to a study you did. Maybe you saw it. He demonstrated a real solid show of nepotism in Italian science institutions, and it got a little flack out there. But he got tons of media attention for it, which on one hand he was like, I was fielding these media calls all the time. But what he said was this amazing bonus that came out of it. He heard from students who were nowhere near his field in his department, but they heard about this, were completely intrigued by the research that he was doing with his algorithm, and they wanted to come work in his department for him. So one of the bonus benefits of that media was that he now has other students and a vaster, possibilities that have been opened up for his lab. And the other thing I'll say, truly, it could lead you to riches and fame. Neil deGrasse Tyson could give 3 talks and earn more than our annual salaries combined. Publish a best-selling book or something for the lay audience. So let me move on to who should be doing this science outreach. I think you can sort of guess. My question is everybody, all of you. But I really mean that. There's an appropriate vehicle for folks, whether you are at a lab or a university or an industry or museums or what have you. There's a role to be played. And also, it's all levels of science. Certainly, there's opportunities for people, grad students, postdocs, all the way up to senior scientists. Now, I have some generalizations that I could sort of make about those sorts of things. On the whole, sometimes I think the more junior folks might have a little more challenges of speaking more broadly, fielding questions that you very often get when you're speaking with non-scientific audiences that are quite far afield. So I think that's one of the challenges that just come with someone with less sort of life experience of doing this kind of outreach. But on the flip side, I've seen a lot of senior scientists who take an approach of, I've been teaching for 30, 40 years. I I don't have to practice this. I don't have to worry about this sort of thing. I know what I'm doing. And they're not as open to feedback and, clever, or I dare say the technology of it that goes along. And also it's all fields. I mean, astronomy to zoology is what we say. There are some aspects of it that I think I'm challenged a little bit by how do I sell things that are more in the engineering technology realm, but we're working on it because I know there is a public audience for that kind of thing. So who are the folks that are receiving it? One thing that I find drives me absolutely bonkers when people talk about science outreach is they use this phrase, they sort of say, yes, you should do outreach. It's about talking to members of Congress, policymakers, the media, and the general public. And they lump all those together in one thing. And I'm here to tell you, those are three radically different audiences. If you are talking to a member of Congress or any elected official, you darn well better get to your government relations office because they have very different agendas and interests in why they're talking to you, not to mention time frames. If you're talking to the media, again, very different reasons for why they want to talk to you, and you absolutely must get some training and some guidance from people in your communications office. And they're there. They want to help you do this. Trust me, they really want to help you. And my other key point is when you say the general public. There is no such thing as the general public. Because the bottom line is if you look at the statistics, about 27% of the U.S. public has a bachelor's. That's it. Much smaller percent has graduate or professional degrees of some kind. And when you realize that, that means you're the 1% in terms of understanding really the importance of science. So when you're looking at 95, 99% of the American public, you've got to understand there's a lot of diversity there in terms of what that audience is. And so, you'd be sort of foolish if you're speaking to any one of those groups without getting some sort of training on how to do it. So the point is you really have to know your audience, why they're there, what they care about. Now let's kind of move on to sort of like where would you have opportunity to do science outreach? I started Science Council because 7 years ago or so, I realized there really wasn't a lot out there for you to do. Maybe a university did something now and again, but there really wasn't that much going on. But then there became this real hue and cry about the U.S. is losing its primacy in science and technology. What are we going to do about it? And so the nice thing about that is, in addition to added attention and focus on education and science curriculum, and I'm not saying it's fixed yet, but there's attention to it, there has been an explosion in the last just 5-6 years of opportunities for scientists to do outreach and that sort of thing. There's certainly been a decline in newspapers and science reporters and that sort of thing, but there's other areas of science communication, at least written, that have absolutely exploded. Blogs, journals, magazines. So if you're a good writer and you want to do that, there are many, many ways that you can do that. And I highly recommend, there's training now for op-eds. You can write for alumni magazines, many, many places looking for guest posts. Bloggers always take guest posts, and there are a ton of really highly regarded, quite well-known science bloggers these days. But if we're talking about in-person, live communication sort of stuff, oh my gosh, there are so many options, and I'm sure there are a lot here in San Francisco. There are science cafes. There are science in the pub sorts of programs, so people drinking over, science kind of thing. There's a fun entity now called Nerd Nights that are done in bars, that are short talks that often are kind of a lot about science. Certainly there are the museums. They might do some outreach programs. There are lab day programs where you can bring students into your labs. I want someone that brings adults into the labs, but that's just because I want to go see them. Book clubs, senior centers, seriously, they're looking for things. I had someone from a library call and say, we're going to start doing a series on science. Do you know who I should use? Lots of community organizations. And I would say any of them, call them up. Pick a local one, call them up, and just volunteer. That would be a great idea. So the question is, what would you talk about if you saw someplace and you want to do this? Again, the focus is it's not really about you. It's got to be about them. It's got to be about the audience and what they want to hear. And here's the key point. I want you to make sure you all understand. It actually doesn't have to be about your research. And I know that's sort of anathema because all scientists are completely trained. You are only allowed to speak about exactly that area of expertise that you know and you know so well. But it's not. I'll tell you, my new favorite scientist is a guy at Northwestern. I was developing a series of programs about neuroscience and brain research this past spring. And I knew this guy, Robin had been told he's a good presenter. His research, though, is on kind of neuropsychopharmacology and depression. And one of my problems is there's a lot of fascinating research in that field about depression and Alzheimer's and schizophrenia and really interesting stuff, but kind of downer topics. And I can't really produce a lot of programs about depression and Alzheimer's and schizophrenia, or nobody wants to come. So I was kind of trying to juggle this, and Robin goes, well, I don't have to talk about my research. Whoever says that? And what he did was we crafted a program that wasn't about depression, but it was a program that called Your Brain on Happiness, and he spoke about neuroplasticity and what they now know and what the research is showing about brain plasticity. It was fascinating, and we attracted a great audience. So I want you to just understand that you know enough. Your area of research is so narrow, nobody's going to get it anyway. So think about you can speak more broadly about topics generally in your field. Now, if you're going to speak to a member of Congress, get some things I wouldn't recommend, speaking too broadly. But in terms of what you're going to talk about, I absolutely want to hone in on this point of the dumbing down of science. I hear this a lot at conferences, and people say, well, yeah, but it's wrong to dumb down the science. It's really bad. That denigrates the profession. It denigrates the subjects, blah, blah, blah. The dumbing down. We can't dumb down the science. Here's what I need to talk to you about. Whenever you're talking to anyone other than talking to yourself, you are making it accessible to them. That's what you're doing. You're making it accessible to them. You are giving them what they want to know, what they need to know, not everything that you know. They don't want to know everything that you know. And so here's the thing. I hate to break it to you. You all got PhDs. When you take your car to the mechanic, he's dumbing it down for you. He is. He's dumbing it down. He knows more about your car and why it's broken than you do. And you don't want to know everything that he knows, right? You don't, or you'd be a mechanic. So the point is he's dumbing it down. You go to a hairdresser. Frankly, she's dumbing it down for you. She knows more about it than you do. So the point is you cannot dumb it down. I want you to feel comfortable saying that you are speaking to an audience and telling them what they want to know, not what you want to know. And certainly you're not going to say things that are wrong, but don't worry about that. So that would be Data, the android from Star Trek. And this is another thing that I realize is the distinction between the scientific training and communicating to a lay audience, is that you've been taught, you put the data out there and let the data speak for itself, right? Let the data speak for itself and it will be convincing. But the problem is that 99%, they do not speak in data. They do not understand it, and it's because they don't understand the context in which it comes. So when you put up more and more data because you think that's going to be more convincing, it doesn't. It doesn't work at all. And essentially, well, all that's going to happen is you put up a bunch of data and they're going to start checking their emails. And so that's what I want to make sure that you understand. And yes, you can give the context, and I want you to give the context around that sort of stuff, but just be cautious about adding more and more data out there because they're not going to get it anyway. And in that point, do not use equations. Just don't. I have one guy who's an astrophysicist. He says, yes, I know I only use one chart and one equation in all of my slides to the lay audiences. But again, people do not speak in equations. They don't think in them. 99% of the public has never used one since they were in high school. So I caution you to really avoid such things. But one of my favorite quotes of all time related to science, and this also speaks to kind of some of these other things. Yes, it's Irma Bombeck, and she's funny, but the idea is every time you talk, remember that it's not just about this particular, whatever the title is that you're giving, rather, but your opportunity to convey what is the scientific process. That's what it's about, the scientific process. You're giving people an opportunity to have more trust and more faith in the scientific process, because you have to counter this sort of headline science that people do think. I have had personal friends of mine say, you know what, they keep changing their minds. Is red wine good for me? Is it bad for me? Those scientists, I can't trust them. They keep changing their mind because they don't read down below the headlines to understand what that means and the nuances of it. And the other thing is, it's a complicated, crazy world we live in right now. And human beings, we like certainty. Certainty is good for us. It's good for our brains. Uncertainty makes you stressed, causes confusion and conflicts. And we all know there is inherent uncertainty in science. Scientists will never say 100% certainty of X, Y, Z. And if you're talking to non-scientists, that's sort of problematic. So every time you give a talk, you have this great opportunity to explain to them and convey that science is about broadening our area of knowledge and understanding, and that hopefully gives some sort of sense of comfort to that. This is another fun quote of mine that I appreciate. This I just want to add in as one kind of quick cautionary note about what you're speaking on, particularly, I guess we could say, in an election season. As I said, in all the national polls, science and the scientific profession, scientists are very highly regarded and consistently are. However, there is some new research out that is showing that when scientists talk about science and their scientific topic, they are highly respected, highly regarded. But once they step outside that and start talking about things that are non-scientific, not only do they lose the trust and respect about their opinion on that other subject, but it also undermines the trust and respect for them speaking about their science. So I just want to caution you to be careful about that. If you're let's say you are an expert on nuclear science operations, and you're speaking to that, but then someone starts engaging you in discussions about U.S. policy around Iran's nuclear capability. Tread very lightly on that. I'm not saying don't talk about it. What I'm saying is make sure that you're very clear when you say, this is me, I'm representing the science and the consensus of the scientific community on this subject, and this is me as an informed citizen developing an opinion on a policy matter. So that's my only point about that. So let's get into sort of the hows. As I said, we're doing some, quick and dirty kind of stuff here. But I also want to make a quick point. Not everyone has to do the public speaking kind of thing. Not everybody necessarily has the interest or the inclination or, frankly, the talent to be a Neil deGrasse Tyson or, Carl Sagan or that sort of thing. Maybe you don't want to. And that's okay. For one thing, you could sort of say, do it where you're comfortable. Maybe you're more comfortable that you can do it kind of ease your way in, talking to Girl Scout and Boy Scout troops or something. Maybe it's a matter of acting as a docent at a museum, which lends itself to more one-on-one kind of communication sorts of things. But even then, I mentioned if you don't want to do any of that, you can do the writing, the blogging, the op-eds, that sort of thing. There is a big new movement now about consulting with Hollywood. The National Academy of Sciences and Entertainment Exchange, and they've got scientists consulting on movies, and there's the fun of how bad Hollywood gets it sometimes, and recognizing the difference between fiction and not. But they do seek out scientists for expertise on films. There's a lot of that going on now with science plays and dramas, and that would be a fantastic place for you to get involved with. You can also choose to get involved in it without doing your science. Maybe you actually want to learn a little something about marketing or programming development or fundraising. I'm telling you, I would give my right arm if some scientist called me up and said, I don't really want to be a presenter, but I'm going to help you get financial contributions from scientists. I mean, that would be a phenomenal sort of thing for the scientific community to engage in. And it doesn't require you to practice and get up on a stage and give a talk. So think about that. Think about just donating your time to organizations that do that sort of thing. So, I'm going to get into some of the tips and tricks about how to do this sort of thing. And feel free to interrupt with questions. So one of the notions I sort of say in how to do outreach, look, people in academia, I understand that being a good instructor is way beyond doing good PowerPoints. It's about pedagogical approaches to things. I'm just talking about the tips and tricks kind of stuff, specifically for non-curricular settings of lay audiences. What I mean is be a normal person. Don't feel like you have to memorize some brilliantly written talk. Memorizing would be bad. You would not go memorize some answers to questions you might anticipate before going to a cocktail party. You wouldn't do that. So I often use that example, like going to a cocktail party, talking science at a cocktail party. Don't read a written talk, please. It's really hard to sit and listen to. And a lot of that has to do is that you write a lot differently than you speak. I heard some line once that was, when you read a script, you are communicating, you stink at this, and don't care about the audience or value their time. Now, I know that's not true, but I understand the pressure that comes on if you're expected to give something. If it's not an area you're totally comfortable with, you're going to write it out. So I would say don't do that. Again, no equations, no graphs. This is to illustrate the idea of science as story. And if you start looking into the notion of science outreach and science communication, you'll hear this a lot. It's telling stories. Human beings, from the dawn of time, have communicated and educated by telling stories. Now, the idea is story beats data, as they say, all along the time for remembering things. But I realize there's a real hitch in this, because I've discovered when you say, I want you to tell stories, scientists tend to think that means fiction and making things up. And that is not what we're talking about here. What I mean is that all of science discovery has a story arc to it. It's the sort of thing that goes, once upon a time, the world was like this, and every day this was the understanding, until one day somebody saw something or heard something or thought something. And because of this, then there were some experiments and some other observations, and we tried to figure out more. And then there were some snags that happened, so then we had to go this way on it, until finally we discovered X. I mean, that's a story arc. And ideally, it's going to involve actual people, real human beings. So that's a narrative flow. It's not fiction. It's not fictionized. It's about engaging the audience in something that they understand and what they typically are accustomed to learning from, which is storytelling. So that's your mission. Find the story arc in what you're doing and realize you're not making this stuff up. So now I want to talk about slides. Wait, where's my little thingy? So, as we see, this guy, the chart that explained the quantum Hall effect. Now, if you'll bear with me, wait, are you guys laughing? Wait, why are you laughing? Because I haven't read it to you yet. So, and here's the thing. See, doesn't this help? If I help you, this helps you, right? This helps you read it when I do this. Wait, it doesn't? It doesn't help? Why do we do these? These do not help. They don't help with anything, unless you're a cat, and then it's fun. So here's the bottom line. People read faster than you can speak. So what happens is you read this slide, and by the time, I have turning around or reading it off my screen maybe, you've already finished it, and now I'm insulting you because you're all literate people and you've already read this, and you realize it is not fun when I go, and the guy said this, and if you keep saying bear with me, you are so bored you've started checking your emails again. So this is sort of just to illustrate to you. Slides are kind of one step above that cocktail napkin idea. So think about it how you would talk to somebody at a cocktail party. You would not come with a full slide deck to answer somebody's question about the work that you would do. So slides are really only to be used as an illustration of what you're speaking about, sort of a demonstration. They're for guidance of your audience. You're not to put all of your notes up there. That doesn't help because they've already read it all just by sitting there before you've even started to speak. And I got to tell you, I could be giving you tomorrow's winning lottery numbers, but if I put all that up there, you're reading that and you've not heard a single thing that I've said because you can't read that and listen to me at the same time. So if you put a lot of complex slides up there with a lot of words on them, just walk away because nobody's going to listen to what you're saying anyway. The focus has to be on you as the communicator. And especially like with PowerPoint, if you look up PowerPoint or communication with PowerPoint, you see things like PowerPoint pain and death by PowerPoint. And what happens is nobody ever says death by Word or death by Excel because those are not tools that are used wrongly. And that's what happens with PowerPoint is people decide to throw up their entire outline or their entire talk in bullet points. And it doesn't make you look smart, and it doesn't make you a good communicator. As I sort of say, more text does not equal more convincing in any way. The 10, 20, 30 rule that is thrown out there is that you should have 10 slides for 20 minutes and at least a 30-point font size or something. Have you ever set something where somebody uses a 12-point font size? It's ridiculous. One line I heard recently, they said, for your font size, you should figure out the age of the oldest person in your audience and divide that in two, and that's the smallest font size you can use. So if there's a 70-year-old, your smallest font is 35 points. And speaking of rules, this one I've seen written in things to scientists. Use 7 lines per slide. 7 things. This is not a good slide. And here's the thing. When you put a lot of words on the slide like this, it does a couple things. Number one, it causes you to turn and look at them, because now you've created a visual thing, and as a human, you're going to turn and you're going to start to look at it. So now you're looking at my backside, which isn't like what I want. But more importantly, especially depending on this, if I turn around, then you can't hear me so much. And then I'm reading it to you, as I said, which is another thing that's just annoying to your audience and doesn't raise you in their esteem level. And like I said, you don't want to annoy your audience. We want a positive experience for you and for the audience in doing science outreach. So here's some other just kind of little tips and triggers and kinds of things. Don't hand out an entire slide deck to people in advance if you don't have to. First of all, even if you did, as I said, there shouldn't be a ton of text in it anyway. But more importantly, they're just going to sit there and read through the entire thing. And if you've got a story arc to it, you're kind of giving away the ending before the beginning. Another point, let me see if I can make this work on this. Okay, little PowerPoint magic. There's lots of little tips and triggers. If I said, all right, now you all have to look at me because there's nothing to see up there, right? Just hit the B key. Turns the screen to black. I think so. So that's your way to sort of refocus the entire audience on something. This other thing. You can key around your entire slide deck. I hit number 1 and the enter key. Now I'm at slide 1. Now I got to figure out what one was I on, right? So you can jump around your slide. I'm sure you've seen somebody gives an incredibly long series of slides, and someone asks a question. You showed something around there about that graph. So the person goes all the way back through the entire slide deck looking to bring that graph up on the thing. So there's little tips and tricks and things within PowerPoint that would be really helpful for you to learn and make it a little more facile as you're doing these sorts of things. I've seen this done so many times. Somebody puts a very complicated thing up there and they say, well, I don't expect you to read all this, or don't bother looking at this. Seriously. Put a giant complicated thing up on the slide and say, now don't bother looking at all of this, but then they'll take their pointer and show you like one tiny little thing or something. Well, that is, again, you're wasting the audience's time. My last little point about sort of the speaking is it's about jargon. Now, I heard an awful lot of acronyms here this morning already, of which I knew exactly one, I think. So the jargon notion, you don't realize what is jargon because everybody in this room understands what that is. So as you mentioned, talk to other people, talk to friends, talk to families, talk to neighbors about things. And as soon as you see their eyes kind of glaze over, that means you use jargon that they don't understand. And the idea is to start just using more commonly accepted terms for what you're talking about. Again, that's not dumbing it down. That's just making it accessible to them. And speaking of throwing up complicated slides and jargon, the American Geophysical Union put this up about the difference between words that scientists use in communicating science, but they're very different from what the public hears when you say this. But see, I'm putting this up and you're not listening to me at all. So, now, what I could have done was pull this out and go, okay, I want you to focus on this one here, but this thing isn't helping that happen. So don't use PowerPoint in a way that I have now forced you to focus on one line in this. And so now this is my personal plea to you. And it's a big one. I need scientists to stop using the word theory. It's just one of the ones on that sort of list. But I really am begging you. We know that in the scientific context, theory means scientific understanding. It's, a vetted explanation, essentially, of the world. In the public, they think it's a guess. They think it's pure speculation when you use that term. So that is why we end up with this huge percentage of the public saying, evolution, it's just a theory. It's just a theory. Why do it's not proven or anything. So I heard recently, I was practically screaming. I heard a science reporter interviewing a scientist in a nice 5-10 minute interview, and both of them used the word theory in both different contexts, both the colloquial sense and the scientific sense in the same interview. And I caught it because I know what the scientist was saying when he was talking about it, but I was thinking that was the most ridiculous use of the word theory I've ever heard. So find another word to use on that. And this, because we're all about me and my needs now, this is just sort of related to it in that context, separate quite from jargon, but I sort of say these are like the pretentious SAT type words that no one ever uses in a casual cocktail conversation. So they don't really serve your purpose. And I just recommend that you sort of bring it back down. These are the sorts of terms you use in writing, not in speaking. So I've dumped an awful lot in here. I'm not trying to put the weight of the world on your shoulders. I'm really, really not. I revere scientists and the scientific profession, and I want you to get out there to other folks. This is sort of, I'm toasting you with Beaker and Dr. Bunsen Honeydew to do this sort of thing. I want you to feel comfortable speaking to non-scientific audiences, as Mike and Don said, because it is really important for the future of our country and the future of your funding and your labs. So I think you all have copies by now, hopefully, of the bingo chart. I mean, I blew through a lot of the stuff that's already on there, but if you have other questions on any of this sort of stuff or any of those things or other things, I'm more than welcome to respond. So, anyone? Critiques? Anyone? All right.
First of all, Monica, that was a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
I wanted, since you mentioned words, I wanted to leave it in our poll in the audience.
Yeah, I want to know about this.
And one of the things that we found that you should never, ever say is basic research. Because the public responds by saying, we should be doing
advanced research. Yep, I've heard this a lot. It's true. I've heard this.
So the answer, how do you talk about it? You just say scientific research. People understand that.
Yes, that's a great point.
I would just add, and you emphasize this, it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And that's an example of it. 2 books that I always recommend, written by kind of political people. Frank Lund, Words That Work, and the subtext is, subtitle is, not what you say, it's what you hear. And the other one, when you were talking about stories, effectively what you're doing is you're engaging people's emotions. And Drew Weston has a marvelous book called Political Brain. He's a neuropsychologist. And he has tested people, including scientists, and a human being first and foremost responds to emotions. And what he says, don't engage people's emotions about half the time engaging
Absolutely. And I think that all of what he said is absolutely spot on. There's also a lot of research that goes to what people actually perceive, and it's mind-blowing, the statistics. It's something like 70% is the judgment about body language. So you already made a judgment call and decided, long before I spoke a word. It's 70% body language and 15% or 20% is tone of voice, and 7% is the words you're actually saying that are coming through. So that's, again, it just reinforces this idea. If you're just droning on or reading a written speech or talking at your slide, you're not getting through to anybody, anywhere. It's about using the excitement. It's about It's all about your enthusiasm. It is about your enthusiasm and your conviction about, I spend my life studying this stuff. I've foregone, careers on Wall Street where I could be filthy rich to do this because it's really cool and it's really interesting. So if you convey that to an audience, that's going to take us all very far, I'd say. So, all right, let me get this out this.